welcome everybody. Brother Goodwin here, Prophecy in the Spotlight. I'm your host, Dr. Charles Hilton, our co-host sitting here with me. And welcome everybody on Radio Land and those of you listening in via YouTube. We want to welcome you to the show today. We're going to do a very great or interesting show. Doc, we're going to do a series on Matthew 24.
Hopefully it'll be helpful to folks.
Yeah. You wrote a document here called An Overview of Matthew 24. And I tell folks, I've said this for years, most false doctrine, as far as the rapture goes, the post-trib, mid-trib, all that, a lot of it comes out of Matthew 24 because people don't understand Matthew 24.
They try to put it in with the church age when it's outside and beyond the church age.
He's talking to the apostles.
His questions and his answers is about the second coming.
And it's the Olivet discourse, we call it. And you wrote a 3-page, it's 8 by 11, it's like a big full-size notebook, 8 by 11, it's 3 pages. And we've decided to add this to our little binder that we're offering folks that we did on apostasy.
They'll put 3 things in there.
3 things in there now. You got your study of the book of Jude, apostasy, from your son,
from my son,
Pastor Mark.
About
For some reason, I was thinking that was you.
5 or 6 pages worth, I imagine.
Yeah. And then I added my angels in the book of Jude in there. And now we're adding this in there. So this is becoming a pretty good little binder here. For a simple donation to the ministry of $25, and we're going to cover the shipping.
All 3 of those would be worth it. For the information.
I got it in a nice clear binder, plastic binder that I put together, and I'm going to cover the expense of that. We'll cover the shipping, and the 25 will go towards the ministry here. And I'm sure it's the content's worth that, but I'm sure the book's not worth $25.
But it's the content that people buy.
Yeah, and they'll be helping the ministry here.
Big help at the present.
We can't go through this whole thing. We're going to do a whole show on this. It'll be 190, is that right? 190, I believe. It's going to be show 190 on the YouTube channel. And you folks on the radio, you won't get this. This is not on the radio. So we're just going to give you a little look at this today. So tell me, Doc, first of all, why are people getting Matthew 24 wrong?
Well, they don't get it all wrong, but they're mixing it in with the church age. When the questions, verses 1 and 2 set the backdrop for the questions he asked. It's in verse 3.
Let me read that before you continue. Verse 3 says, as he sat upon the Mount of Olives. Let me start in verse 1. Jesus went out and departed from the temple. So they've just left the temple. And his disciples came to him. So right away, he's talking to his disciples, right? To show him the buildings of the temple. They're bragging on the temple. And Jesus said to them, see you not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And then verse 3, and as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, tell us. Now this is just the apostles. Tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world?
So they walked by the temple. From the temple out the eastern gate, across the Kidron Valley, an eighth of a mile or more, up on the Mount of Olives. So they're thinking as they're walking along, what did he mean? So their first question, when is this going to happen? Meaning the stones being thrown down. And then they said, also, when are you going to come back to set up your kingdom? And what's going to be the signs of the end of the world or the end of this age? So they asked these 3 questions, and so from that point forward, even though their questions aren't in exact order, the Lord's going to answer them in order, and he's going to begin where they're at, and he's going to walk you all the way through the end of the millennial reign, and then he's going to bring it back to their time at the end. And so they want to know, when are these things going to happen? So it's called the Olivet discourse because Jesus is sitting on the Mount of Olives teaching this.
So people get mixed up here why? Why do people, even preachers,
yes,
preach something that's not accurate?
Because there are things in his answers that are parallel in how other things are going to happen, particularly the rapture. Because the rapture is going to happen, and there's going to be some people go and some people left behind. And so they go over to two working in the field or two in the bed. One's left and one's left, and say, well, that's got to be the rapture. No, this is beyond the rapture, because this is all in the setting of the second coming of the Lord, which is, you know, as well as anybody, this is after the rapture.
So it's a rapture, but it's not the rapture.
It's not the rapture, and the two working in the field and the one be taken, the other left, has to do with the goat and sheep nations preparing for the millennial reign. And it has with the fact, because he connects it in chapter 24 with Noah. One shall be taken and the left. What happened in Noah's day? The ones that were in the ark were taken alive, and the others were left and dead. Mm-hmm. And so it can be a picture of, it could be a picture, maybe if it's of a rapture, it would be of the rapture of the tribulation saints.
Right, and I teach it this way, and I know you and I talked about this earlier. It's our bodily resurrection is what the rapture is. We tend to think it's about us, but it's not. No. It's a bodily resurrection of all the saints who have died.
Yes.
But since we haven't died yet, in that bodily resurrection, we go with our body.
We get a change.
Yeah, and that's exciting for us, but it's really not about us.
No.
It's a bodily resurrection. Mm-hmm. And it's just like a farmer. A field is harvested in 3 stages. You got your first fruits, then you got your main harvest,
right,
and then you got your gleanings. And this is the gleanings here.
I'm
at
convinced
the end of the
it
tribulation.
Is. Yes.
There has to be a time, and we were talking about this in your office, and we don't understand all of it, but it's certainly pretty clear that there are people saved at the end of the tribulation. There are still people alive who have become believers. Mm-hmm. And when the Lord comes on the white horse, what do you do with them? And by the way, there's martyrs during the tribulation.
The greater majority will be, I believe, martyrs.
So their body is in a grave or laying in the street. Mm-hmm. What happens to their body? How do they get there? They're going to be resurrected bodily just like we are at the rapture.
And that's why we're going to, at the rapture, we're going to get a body like unto Christ, glorified body.
Yeah.
Because what people don't realize, and maybe we need to do a show on this, God designed man from Adam on for the purpose of living on the earth. And I know everybody talks about, man, we can't wait till we go to heaven.
I never heard this in my life until a few minutes ago in your office. Never thought about that before.
We all the time talking about, man, I can't wait to go to heaven. God designed humanity now and in our future body to dwell on the earth.
Yeah.
He said, the earth is the Lord's and fullness thereof, and he said, we're going to inherit the earth. What did Jesus inherit after the cross? He inherited a seat on the throne. What was he on the throne of? He has the earth under his footstool. What does the Bible say? That you and I are joint heirs with Christ Jesus.
Yeah.
You know what's going to happen? He's going to have a brand new earth and a brand new heaven after the millennial reign. You know why? For our new bodies to dwell on the earth.
Boy, there's a lot to think of. A lot to think about.
Yeah. It doesn't mean, because to most people, heaven is some kind of a cloudy thing. And a lot of people use the word heaven, and what they're really talking about is the celestial city of the New Jerusalem. Yeah. And so the New Jerusalem in a new heaven and a new earth is going to be on the earth.
So let's go over your notes here. You got 3 pages here. What I liked about this when I took a look at it was the fact that you have put a heading above each passage.
What happened, Dan, the reason this came about, and of course, I'll have her find it in my bookstore later for the show, but I have a 2 CD teaching on this right here. But I had a preacher call, and he said, Doc, I'm getting ready to teach through Matthew 24, and I'm trying to figure out how does the pieces fit together. It seems like something goes here and maybe something goes there. And I said, well, let me call you back in about 30 minutes, and I'll email you something. So I sat down, and I put this little outline together. from my studies in the past.
Yep.
And when I sent it to him and then went over it with him, he said, "Oh, now I see." And so that's what I did. And I just handed you a copy, showed you what I did with him, and now weeks later you're saying, here, we need to cover this.
I've had this for several weeks, and I just now recently picked it up and started looking at it.
Well, in the Lord's timing.
Yeah, and I said, wow, this is... Now, we did a show for last week about the eclipse.
Yes.
And I was telling my wife on the way here, I said, now, that eclipse show is going to be much more exciting for people. Mm-hmm. But this is more important than the eclipse. Yeah. This is understanding.
And it would really help preachers if they get a hold of this. It would help them to be able to help their people.
Yeah. For instance, you got, of course, your introduction here, verses 1 through Matthew 24, 1 through 8 there. Mm-hmm. But then you start your headings here, I think in front of verse 9. From their time to the 70th week of Daniel. In other words, from their time as they're speaking, the disciples right there.
Through verse 14 is events bringing them up to the time of Daniel chapter 9 and verse 27.
Yeah, and they shall deliver you up to be afflicted. See, that's before the tribulation. Yep. So these verses are talking about before, and then you get down to verse 15, and it changes. And there's another heading here, from the beginning of the tribulation to the middle. Now,
it takes you right through and honestly, you could go to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and find the parallel to this.
And this is pretty obvious, Matthew 24:15. When you therefore shall see the abomination of desolation.
That's the middle. That's the middle of the tribulation.
It is the middle, and there's a whole lot of things that happen right there at the middle. We're going to do a show on that one. I keep talking about it, but we haven't done it yet. There's a whole bunch of things. Now we got less than 2 minutes, Doc. What else would you like to say about this before we shut this down and get the show going?
People need to understand that there's a couple of places in this part. Matthew covers it in this way. Luke covers it, some in chapter 17 and some in chapter 21. And chapter 13 of Mark covers from their different perspective from this.
Right.
To really gain an understanding, and what I do in that CD I'm talking about, I put all three of these together. And but it's all about beyond the church age. So don't when you talk about the one taken and the other left and all that, because there's similarities to the rapture of the church, doesn't mean that it's talking about the church age.
In other words, this takes place before the rapture and after the rapture. Everything in Matthew 24.
Everything in Matthew 24 begins after the rapture and takes you all the way to the millennial reign.
Yeah.
And then in chapter 25 has all of these parables. And they all reinforce what he has just taught.
He gives a parable to illustrate these things.
They go together, yes.
Okay. All right, well, folks, we got a half a minute left. Thanks for listening in today. And remember, we're viewer-supported, listener-supported. If you'd like to help keep us on the air and keep our ministry growing and reaching more people, send us an email or go to the website, hit the donate button, whichever is good for you. You can send a check. We're coming up on our bill being due again, so we're a little bit, we're at the end of it here. So if you can help, we appreciate it. All right, God bless, and keep your eyes on them skies.